All right, good evening, everybody. Welcome to our April Book Club event in celebration of National Poetry Month. It's good to see returning faces and some new friends with us. For those of you who are watching at home, thank you for joining in. And my name is Stephanie Steinberg, founder of the Detroit Writing Room, for those of you who have not met me. I'm very excited to have two Wayne State University Press poets with us tonight, Cindy Hunter Morgan and Peter Markus. They will each be sharing some readings. Cindy's book, Far Company, comes out next month, and Peter's book has been out for about a year, I believe. Well, thank you, Marie, and thank you to the Wayne State University Press for partnering with us for this book club this year. We appreciate it. And the books that we have a book giveaway at the end, so make sure to stay on Zoom until the very end in order to win a copy of each book. All right, well, without further ado, I am excited to introduce us to our first poet of the evening, Cindy Hunter Morgan. I'm just going to quickly read a little bio. Cindy is the author of Harbourless, also published by the Wayne State University Press, and two chapbooks, Apple Season and The Sultan, the Skater, the Bicycle Maker. Harbourless was a 2018 Michigan Notable Book and the winner of the 2017 Moveen Prize in Poetry. So Cindy, thank you for joining us tonight. We're excited to get a sneak peek of Far Company.
Thank you, Stephanie. I'm delighted to be here. And I think this concept, this new version of a book club is wonderful. And I really admire how you're building a community of people and we're all in different homes and kitchens and studios and bedrooms right now. But we're sharing this evening together. So it's a great model of a book club. And thank you for hosting this, and thanks to the Detroit Writing Room and Wayne State University Press. I'm really happy to be here. Stephanie mentioned that my first book with Wayne State University Press was Harbourless, and Harbourless was a book of poems informed by Great Lakes shipwrecks. So are you hearing me okay? Yeah, great. So most every poem in that book is titled after the name of a ship and the year it went down and the body of water in which it went down. And Far Company, the book I happen to have a little advanced copy here, is a very different book in some ways, but there's something. I mean, I'm not exploring shipwrecks in it, and it doesn't have that kind of unity to it, but it does have. I think that writers have emotional zones in which we thrive, and subjects too sometimes, but the subjects themselves are sometimes a kind of emotional zone. And I grew up living sometimes with, but also working and playing at my grandparents' apple orchard west of Lansing. And that land was very special to me, and they were very special to me, and I still miss them. And that life on the orchard, I don't know, in a way it's another kind of obsession, just as shipwrecks were for a while a kind of obsession. So too is the orchard and my grandparents. And Tony Hoagland, a poet I admire very much, said that an obsession gives a poet a heat source catalytic enough to channel into for a lifetime, which I think it feels really true for me. I write a lot about the orchard and that land and my grandparents. One of the chapbooks, Apple Season, is very much informed by that place and my relationship with my grandparents. So there are a lot of poems in Far Company that are thinking about that place and thinking about my grandparents. Margaret Atwood said that all writing is motivated by fear of and fascination with mortality, and by a desire to make that risky trip to the underworld and bring back something or someone. And I feel like that's really true for many of the poems in Far Company. I think it's, of course, very true for Peter's poems in When Our Fathers Return to Us as Birds. And he, even one of his poems, I did what I could to keep this, begins, I am here to translate my father's death into fruit. And that's what so many of us are doing as writers and poets and as readers and as human beings in this world. We're trying to turn grief into art. I was just listening to, I think it was a Fresh Air program with Ocean Vuong, another poet I admire very much. And he said, his new book, he's thinking about his mom, the death of his mother. And in this interview, he said he thinks that grief is the final translation of love. So all of that is to say, I think it's just wonderful that Peter and I are paired together for this program. And I think our poems are, as I mentioned to Peter earlier, are in many ways in conversation with each other. And I think that can be satisfying for a reader to find those kind of like relationships between the work you're reading, so that when you move from book to book, you never totally abandon a book. You know, you carry it around inside of you. And maybe I will share a couple of those poems. I've been talking a lot about what informs them, and maybe I'll share a couple of them. I'll share the title poem, Far Company, and tell you that the title actually is a title of one of W.S. Merwin's poems. And my poem uses his title and the first line of his poem. And then I turn that entirely into my poem. But there are several poems in this book that do that use a title and a first line from a Merwin poem. And I felt like, it felt like I was holding hands with Merwin in the most beautiful way for those poems. And they're not all the poems do that, but I don't know, there's maybe about 10 that do that, maybe a little more than 10. But it makes me think too of Richard Hugo's notion of like the triggering subject. And, you know, he wrote this book, and he spends a lot of time in the book thinking about the importance of the triggering subject and then the risk of the triggering subject. And for me, and his point is like, yeah, you might think you want to sit down and write a poem about X, but really you need to move away from X for that poem to travel somewhere and do something new. And so holding hands with Merwin was wonderful for me, because it forced me to surrender a certain amount of control, because he was beginning the poem, I wasn't. And then I just picked up a thread, which was in fact a different thread on a new needle. So Far Company, Merwin's first line was, at times now from some margin of the day. That's his line. Far Company. At times now from some margin of the day, I can smell apples cooking in a pan. For a moment, cinnamon, or maybe only the memory of cinnamon, until all of it blows away and I am left remembering not apples, but what apples help me remember. My grandmother at the stove, her apron tied behind her into a bow, the bow like a swallowtail. And I'm afraid if I move, I'll spook the butterfly, but I move anyway. There is no way to make anything last. And then I'm outside another house with another open window, where the scent of apples has floated and settled in a pot of bubbling oatmeal. And my mind, which like a child had stayed behind to remember the calico print of the cotton apron, clambers up behind me, tugs my jacket sleeve, and wonders if we should walk home to the garden and wait by the zinnias. Then I'll read another one, and I'll read another kind of Merwin partnership one. So this Antique Sound, that was the title of one of Merwin's poems. And then his first line was, "There was an age when you played records." And then I took that and wrote my own poem. And one of the reasons I'm choosing this one to read is because it references maps in it. And I love maps. And the cover, I know you're not supposed to purchase a book based on the cover, but I kind of think you should in this case. And, you know, Wayne State University Press makes so many beautiful covers. And I'm really excited about this one. It features art from Matthew Cusick, who took tiny pieces of maps and tore them, all different maps, and tore them into tiny pieces and assembled them into something that became a piece of art. So from tiny pieces of maps, he has created a kind of collage in which you can find a bird and a nest and a snake threatening that nest. And it's exquisite. I'll kind of hold it up there, and it's not a, you know, it's an over the screen representation, and it doesn't give you a chance to really stare at it. But Antique Sound. There was an age when you played records made from shellac, and later there was another of vinyl. But these days I play topo maps cut into 12-inch discs, glued together to form two sides. I've been playing one map of an old orchard over and over, listening to the music of blossoms and the sound of the eastern ridge where the orchard ended. When I flip the map, I can hear the crinkle of frost crystallizing below that ridge, the sound of the river beyond the orchard. On the steep slope above the river is a thicket of grapevines, and when the map spins fast enough, I can hear the tags on the collar of a beagle jingle. She's flushed a rabbit, and soon she'll appear, her ears bleeding from briars. I am close to being there. I am stretched out on the floor with my eyes closed, just like a teenager. But the album ends too soon, as the best records do. When this one wears out, as it will, I'll cut a thin cross section from the stump of an old apple tree, and I will play the rings through cambion, sapwood, and heartwood until the needle finds the pith. And I'll read one more. And this one is thinking about my mom. And, you know, we most of us have memories of moments when we needed our moms. And this was a moment when just a physical reminder of her in my pocket mattered a lot. So there are poems of childhood in here too, and this is one of those. It's called Amulet. Amulet. That Halloween, I was a new girl. First day at a new school. I could have worn street clothes, been the girl nobody knew. But I went as a mute clown sewn from a bed sheet, faded stripes, ruffled collar. My mother made it and made my wig, red yarn stitched to a muslin bonnet. My mother, who took me to school, left me with a sack lunch and a tube of lipstick, Revlon's Cherries in the Snow, her only makeup. For the parade, she said, closing her palm over mine. I marched behind Cleopatra. Cleopatra, I thought that was her name. Necklace coiled like a snake, gold cape like a river, plastic, store-bought, though I said nothing. Later, we had cupcakes and fruit punch, then bingo with bottle caps. At recess, I wandered like a fool, my hands in the pocket of my costume, until I made it through the gauntlet of jump ropes and swings into a grove of maples in the far corner of the playground and pulled the lipstick tube out. Gold, shiny, hard as the shell of a scarab. My mother in front of the bathroom mirror before church. My mother in the grocery store, shoe store, fabric store. My mother released to me in wax and red dye. Thank you.
Beautiful, excellent,
Yes,
beautiful.
we like to sometimes do snaps with
You're
our
right.
poetry events. So that's why I'm snapping over here. Those were beautiful, as Julian said, and just elicit a lot of memories. Even just hearing you speak about being young and Halloween parties and mom memories. Well, let's move to Peter, and then we will open it up for Q&A. So if you have a question for Cindy, please hang on to it. Peter Markus is the author of the novel Bob, or Man on Boat, as well as the books of short fiction, We Make Mud, and The Fish and the Not Fish, which was selected as a Michigan Notable Book in 2015. Other books include Inside My Pencil, Teaching Poetry in Detroit Public Schools, about the work that Markus has been doing for the past 2.5 decades with Inside Out Literary Arts. Over the years, he's been published in many literary journals. And in 2012, he was named a Kresge Fellow in Literary Arts. And in 2015, he received the Teaching Excellence Award from Oakland University, where he's been teaching since 2013. So Peter, thank you for joining us. I'm excited to hear some of the poems from When Our Fathers Return to Us as Birds.
Oh, thank you for having me, Stephanie. It's so good to see everyone here in this very intimate space that is Zoom. And Cindy, that was just an incredible reading from your beautiful book, which I happen to have a sneak copy of. So I've been feasting on it for the past month or so, and it was just good to hear the words come alive on your tongue. And speaking of your tongue, I mean, the things that Cindy said to sort of lead into her work was like a 5-minute lecture that it spends me a semester to say all those things about obsession, about finding the heat source, which I've never heard it used in such a way, but it's so important as a writer to find those things that animate us as humans. I wanted to say as artists, but I think even before as artists, it's the things that, you know, make us feel that we have something urgent to say. And whether or not it's people or words like grandmother, or even just simple objects or nouns such as apple or orchard, and how the two sort of feed each other and then lead us into the poem itself, which Cindy's opening poem certainly does that. And then, of course, her reference to Richard Hugo, which is a book that I teach every semester, and the notion of finding your subject or finding your town or your sense of place, which isn't enough. You have to also then sort of see where, you know, how that place or the language sort of opens up a door inside of you. And then again, the poems, I think when you do that, the poems sort of write themselves, I've found. Or even I'm mostly a fiction writer, and I sort of have always written any book starting out just by following the language. And it's always about kind of language that I'm obsessed with, whether or not it's a word as simple as Bob, which is the novel that I wrote, or even boat, or my obsession with rivers, and specifically the one river that runs through each of my books. So it's very easy for me to keep on sort of, I never experience writer's block because I know that I have these words that are always there for me. And though I try not to sort of repeat myself too often, though I certainly am guilty of repeating myself quite often, those words are always there to sort of guide me into the next poem, story, book. And I think you'll see some of those kind of recurrences or repetitions in the poems that I'm going to read tonight. Um, the only other thing I would say is prefacing my reading is, and this is something that I bring into every teaching situation that I'm allowed to do, is um, a line from the short story writer and poet Raymond Carver, who told us to make use of the things around you. And I remember I'm always giving, that's always how I start any kind of teaching that I do, is with this poem called Sunday Night that opens with that line. And it's funny because sometimes I teach all the time. I teach with Inside Out. I teach at Oakland University. I teach private workshops. People ask me, how do you find time to write with all the teaching that you do? But what I found is that it gives me more energy to approach my own pages when I'm constantly telling my students to do certain things. And then I'm saying, well, it's time that you listen too. So that one line, make use of the things around you. When my father got sick in his early 80s, though he'd had some prior afflictions even before that, but when he got really sick and was bedridden, and I was waking up every morning at 5 a.m. to sort of honor one of his own rituals. He would always get up at 5 a.m. and basically exercise. And as a kid, I remember, like, waking up in the middle of the night to just go get a drink of water, and it would be 5 a.m. and my father would be, doing push-ups and sit-ups and all sorts of, uh, kind of exercises just to be alive and be fit and to start his day in this kind of ritualistic way. Um, but when I started doing that myself, when he got sick, and my parents live in Groseal, which is an island community across the river from where I live in Trenton, Michigan. But I would wake up every day with this same sentence sort of spinning in my head. And the sentence was, my father is dying in a house across the river, or some variation of that sentence, which can be shaped any number of ways. And, I would, Cindy mentioned how our poems certainly feel like they're in conversation with each other through some of their obsessions. She's certainly in conversation with W.S. Merwin. And so I like to begin my day, and I still do it to this day, by waking up and reading poems. It seems like a good way to start the day. It can, I don't know, it's sort of like waking up to prayer or waking up to a kind of exercise. But here I'm just entering into the world of someone else. And sometimes those poems that I'm reading lead to the poems that I'm writing. But when they don't, that's okay too, because I've spent the morning in what I think is a very human act, and it connects me certainly with the world. So I started doing that, and that's when these poems from this new book of mine were born out of that morning ritual. And I started writing poems in a way that I never had before in my life, with that line informing everything I was saying. Make use of the things around you. Put it all in is also the line that follows that opening line. So I started listening, and the thing that was happening, the thing itself, was my father in a house dying across the river. And I couldn't help but listen to the things that were being told to me, or being the things that I was being even instructed to write about. And the fact that I was really also embracing, um, the words of Mary Oliver, who said, pay attention, be astonished, tell about it. So those were really my sort of my guiding lighthouses into this book. Um, and um, obsession, fear, desire, um, that heat source that Tony Hoagland speaks about, that Cindy mentioned. I hope that they're quite evident as I begin to read some of these poems. So I'm just going to begin by reading a few of these, or keep on by reading a few of these. Everyone can hear me okay too? So this first poem is What My Father Did Not Have to Say. In his final days, my father did not speak because he could not speak. He did not ask how the car was running, or about the kids or his granddog. He did not ask about work. He did not look out at the boats on the river to say, there goes a 32-footer, or the lines on that boat are really fine. He did not say the water was at its highest in 25 years. If his lips moved at all, it was only when I wiped them with a wet washcloth, or put yogurt on a spoon up to them, hoping he would eat. He did not eat, and he did not speak, and soon his breathing slowed until there was nothing. He'd been slowly dying, and now he was dead. I did not know what to say, and so I said little out loud. I walked down to the river, where I thought maybe I would find something there to tell me what I was supposed to do now. The loons sat on the water and dove under when a boat motored close by. They did not sing, not right then at least. Only later at night did they call out to each other, their voices crisscrossing the river in the April dark. So I'm just going to read a few of these poems in sequence, and then we'll sort of open it up to some questions. This poem is called The Name of the Father, the Name of the Fish. In the moments after my father died, I lathered up his face with soap to shave him. It was the very least that I could do after everything he had always done for us. My mother praised my tenderness, how close I was able to get under his nose and neck, those places where when he was alive, he would pull his face away and tell me to stop. Afterwards, I went down to the river to draw a glass of water from the river we both loved. I dipped my hands into the water to anoint him in the name of the Father and the fish. On his head, his hands, his feet, his belly, upon his heart, I made the sign of the cross, followed by a fish. Next, a crescent moon. I raised the glass of water, which sparkled. It was so clear and so clean, as was my father, as was the clarity that death brings. Cindy mentioned the line from this poem, I am here to translate my father's death into fruit. So I think I'll read this poem. I did what I could to keep this. I am here to translate my father's death into fruit, something that can be held, to bring it up to your lips the way I spooned strawberry yogurt up to his and said to him the word eat. There was no use in the end. There was no hunger. When you are 86 and stop eating, you die. On his death certificate, under cause of death, the word malnutrition. I did what I could to keep this from my mother. When she saw it, I watched her face. What was left inside her went to someplace else. I said something to her to make sure she knew it wasn't her fault. There was nothing she could do. It means that he stopped eating, is all I said. My mother nodded. My father later zipped into a bag and taken away from us forever. The man who did the zipping took me by the elbow to tell me we might not want to watch. I took my mother into the other room, then went back because I wanted to see. My mother returned to see too. They wrapped my father up in a sheet my mother had recently washed. It smelled of lavender and bleach. I had shaved my father minutes after he drew his last breath, wiped his face clean in a way that pleased my mother. It was the least I could do. Later, when I asked if she was hungry, she shook her head to tell me no. I'd slept on the carpeted floor the night before my father's last, kept watch asleep in my clothes behind the couch beside his bed. If I dreamed, I don't remember. I don't remember more than this little bit I am trying to hold, this small fruit, a single grape pulled from the cluster in the fridge. They put my father into a van and headed south along the river. The road to the bridge gets bumpy, was all I told them after they shut the rear doors where they slid inside the narrow gurney with my father's dead body on it. He had already started to become something else. In the darkness at the edge of that road, I stood for a little while before walking down to the river, where the dark water moved in its usual ways, as if it were following my father, going under the bridge they drove across as they took him even further away.